Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I come from a little bit different perspective. I am material designer and researcher. And to start with, I actually wanted to say, to be a material designer is not necessarily about creating new materials. World went crazy recently, You create things from everything. It's also about bringing public awareness about existing materials, and changing attitude and behavior of existing daily consumers, us, because we can live with less, and we don't need a pineapple in the winter and all other goods. But going back to my project, I'm going to present forest wool. I'm working on other materials, but forest wool was something that I developed further. In preparation for this talk, I questioned what is my relationship to craft, because I always considered myself to be a designer. But looking back, actually, all my work is inspired by a local cultural and historical knowledge from the past. I was always fascinated by craft, I realized. And if you think how respectful craft always was, materials and products were made taking in mind local environment and also local human needs. So this were always the basic of my beginnings. And I was born in Russia and I grew up in Latvia, and somehow I believe Eastern European people have really close connection to nature. I don't know, is it cultural or is it poverty, but I grew up following my grandfather's steps, going into garden. We had a piece of land, we harvested our vegetables, we planted our vegetables, we harvested seasonal mushrooms and berries. I collected my own medicine, so I learned a lot, and this knowledge always fascinated me. And unfortunately, because of the development of mass production and global trade, a lot of this knowledge is left behind. And simply because, it's much easier to get things, shift from one country to another, and, local things which are available right now and right here are no longer considered important. So when I started working with forest wool, actually, in that moment, I didn't know it's going to become a forest wool, I looked at existing plants around which are growing within Europe, and what kind of knowledge is there, what kind of knowledge is forgotten. And I always go back to birch bark, which is commonly used material within Russian craft, but also Finnish craft. We used to make shoes, clothes, containers, you name it, from that material. It's sustainable. It also adapts easily to different environment, humidity, and stuff. And besides that, there is amazing dandelion flower, which I like to mention all the time. In early 30s, Russia used to make rubber goods out of dandelion juice coming from the roots of the flower, simply because in that time, everyone was producing rubber goods from the rubber tree, the juices from rubber tree. Russia didn't have an access to rainforests, so they tried to do things, best things out of local materials which were available locally. And besides, I have lots of different materials which I looked at, and I'm working with some already now. In that moment, I discovered the pine tree. I don't know, it's probably a sentimental value because, I grew up walking through the pine forest myself. And pine tree, actually, it's the most common industrially grown tree because it grows very quickly. It reaches maximum diameter within 70 years or even less because, it expands quickly depending on the environment. And it's also a native tree. It's not an alien species within our forest. It's the most common tree within European and Euro-Asian forests. And in that time, I was actually interested more about the political aspect of the tree rather than different benefits. So it's economically the most significant tree because we use it for furniture, construction material, paper, you name it. Lots of paper goods and timber is made from pine tree. But it has amazing environmental benefits as well because it's evergreen tree. So if you think in the summer all trees have leaves, so they purify air. But once winter comes, they all drop the leaves. So there is only conifers and evergreen trees which continue to purify the air through the winter. So there is a big benefits of it. And it's also a tree which grows on very poor, soily, sandy soil where another trees cannot grow. It's a home for a lot of animals and insects, and it's a great wind barrier. Besides that, there is a lot of cultural and historical value of the tree. Asian culture worships the tree. I think when the boy is born, the first gift that a family of the father gives is a pine tree. And besides that, it produces a lot. It used to give us a lot of medicine, and it still does in very small traditional scale. Food, in Scandinavia, inner bark was used in the bread. But besides that, it's actually the Latvian national stone, amber, comes from a pine tree. It's basically the resin which goes into the ocean, stays there for 100 years, and is washed out, which was really interesting to discover. And in that moment, I actually discovered pine needle. And going back, I looked at all parts of the tree, actually, what happens to the roots of the tree, what happens to the stem of the tree, what happens to the branches of the tree. And I rediscovered that there is also pine needle, and there is nothing done to pine needle, because it cannot be grinded with the branches into mass, because it contains too much resin, which creates too much fume while burning. So what forestry does, and I follow the forestry to see what is actually happening, they try to get rid from the pine needle as much as possible and leave it over there, which is a good nutrition food. Besides that, there is a big possibility for fires within the forest, because there is a lot of waste which is still covering the soil. And if you look and you think, well, the pine tree is the most common tree, and annually there is approximately 600 million pine trees felled each year, which creates a lot of waste. So there's a huge amount of pine needles left behind. So in that moment, I became really curious, and I looked into history, what has been done with the pine needle, what is the composition of the pine needle. And so I discovered that besides the oils, lignin, cellulose, chlorophyll, which is a natural color, there is also a cellulosic fiber within it. And this was a beginning for my material research. So I took a pine needle without knowing how I'm going to do that. So I, created lots of different ways how to process it. I looked at the existing industrial techniques. I looked at the craft techniques and how, flax and other fibers used to be processed in the past and what I can do. So I have developed eventually non-waste production. So when you process pine needles, which can be processed green or dry in different states, you can actually extract essential oil, which can be used in medical, therapeutical, but also as a perfumery or other possibilities. And all the water which comes from the processes is high on chlorophyll. However, it's not a chlorophyll. Chlorophyll disappears while processing, applying the heat on the needle. And that chlorophyll, that water contains a lot of dye, which can be actually used as a natural dye in different applications. And recently I looked into possibilities how I could transform this into powder and how it can have a different application, because we all know dyes and coloring is one of the most unhealthy industries nowadays. So a lot of designers also looking at possibilities of using natural dyes and natural components of the dyes to be used in more industrial scale. So I looked in the byproduct from my processes, which was a natural dye. So I powdered it and combined it different ways. It can be used as a wood stain, paint, depending on different binders. It can be have different applications, or dye for the fabric. Here we come to the fiber. So after processing, crushing, carding, you get the fiber. Fiber can have whites and different colors depending on how long you wash it, how you process it, and how much you card it. And what you have seen here is all done by my hands. So industry rejected me in that moment because nobody really believed or nobody saw that, and it was kind of something very surprising for everyone. I tried hard in that time. So if you think about how much fiber you can create annually, and I'm also talking about, there is coir, there is another, cocoa fiber. There is a lot of fiber which comes from India, you name it. But we should look into local fibers, which are byproduct, which can be used and can be applied in a more sustainable way. And besides that, everyone knows cotton is evil. I looked how I can use existing industrial techniques and how my fiber can be transform it into different materials. So it can be spun on itself, or it can be mixed with different materials. And again, once it's industrially processed, it becomes more fine, refined, and lots of things can be done with it. It can be needle felted into felt, which doesn't necessarily have to have beautiful aspect. It can be used within the building construction and building industry as isolation material or packaging material. It can be mixed with different types of plant fiber, animal fibers. It can be pulped into paper, or fiber formed with different soft binders, healthy binders, and 3D formed. I already mention this all the time. I don't know if they still produce. In Albertine, they used to have their packages from cocoa fiber for egg packages. I don't know if they're still there. But this is done with a cocoa fiber. But at the same time, there is a local fiber produced right here. Why don't we pack our eggs in our own material, which is available here? And can be composed into a biocomposite, depending on the strength needed and the quality of the composite. All kind of binders can be different. It can be also composed on itself using a resin, like MDF material, using pressure and resin. And also it depends how long fiber is, if it's in a regional length, if it's pulped. So all kind of different composites can be used, taking in mind the application, of course. It can be composed with flexible composites, and this can be used, as a leather alternative or in fashion. So maybe you have seen, this is a part of Atelier NL exhibition at this moment as well. Those two products I came up, but I don't want necessarily to say that it should have a really aesthetic application. I'm always thinking about, very simple application like construction or building, but it can also it can be applied in the furniture. So what I have done, I created a rug, which was, stuffed with loose fiber, top was made from a felt, but I also created series of stools. Here you see just a hard covering stool, but I also made a polyester one. And the idea was to show different qualities of the material in different applications. So the stool was made out of a biocomposite. It was stuffed with the loose fiber, and the upholstery was made with needle felt. And in that sense, you could show how things can be applied. To finish my presentation, when I graduated, I thought I had a really clear idea. There were so many internationals with already established industrial processes. So I thought, I'm just going to enter a big company, and I'm going to become a consultant and help them to bring the project on a different level, which happened. I've been approached, and I've been lucky to be approached by so many companies, but at the same time, our vision somehow went in different directions. Suddenly, harvest was no longer local, but it was in rainforest, or suddenly production was not close to the sources, but was in China. So all these things kind of scared me, because, I started with such a pure intentions, and suddenly things turned in completely, alien. So in that moment, I realized, I think that what I have to do, I have to start again and do my research independently, looking for support for small independent companies and seeing how this can be translated and be upscaled later. Thank you.